like the idea of new money. They like the idea of a new narrative. I think there's an issue with the connection with Sheffield United that needs highlighting. I do think it is embarrassing that you've got a country, a state, which has, you only got to read the Amnesty International report into some of the things that have been connected to the Saudi royal family. And from a journalistic perspective, what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, and we all saw his widow's letter to the Premier League, very emotional letter to the Premier League. And I think there are serious human rights concerns. And I think if the takeover does go through, there will be demonstrations outside St James's Park. But I think if anything is going to derail this bid, and I still think it will go through, I agree with Martin on that, it will be the issue of the broadcast rights, because the thoughts of a wealthy overseas broadcaster like being upset, that will rankle with other clubs as well. But actually, my first thoughts are actually with the Newcastle United fans, because they're the ones who are in the middle of this. They're the ones who've had to live through Mike Ashley. The last time I fell out with the Newcastle United fans and lost a bet with them, I had to swim the Tyne. So I'm going to back them on this one. I really think that this is a huge moment for them, the whole cans thing that they're talking about how they're going to celebrate. But I think we all need to urge some caution when the takeover does go through, that the focus on human rights in Saudi Arabia will become even more intense. And I think the Newcastle United fans and the club have to be aware of that as they go into this takeover.
John, does it show how ludicrous the scenario is? We're talking about human rights, we're talking about broadcasting rights as well. But there's already been speculation about Steve Bruce's position should the takeover go through. And I have to say, it beggared belief when I saw one story saying that he would be given until the end of the season. What season?
Well, exactly. I mean, where does it start? I mean, listen, I completely understand it from Newcastle fans' point of view. And I think, I must say, I think the potential takeover really troubles me much more from a moral point of view than it does from the TV rights point of view, which is clearly a very individual kind of dispute between two nations and two areas there. And listen, I just think that you can't blame the Newcastle fans for thriving on that hope. But that doesn't then separate the fact that basically I think over the last week or so we've been absolutely right and I have to say I don't think it's from all areas to question the moral aspect, the human rights aspect, which I think is a massive thing. But moving on from that, I just feel that basically it is ridiculous that, Steve Bruce, to all intents and purposes, when you consider how unhappy Newcastle fans are, simply because of perhaps the lack of investment, the lack of support, I think you step back and then say, well, amidst that and in that context, what an incredible job of work Steve Bruce has done. Yes, sometimes I get the fact that it's not the football that they want. Yes, I get the fact that basically he's associated almost, despite being obviously a lifelong Newcastle fan and Geordie himself, he's associated as Mike Ashley's man. Well, he's not been that man for my point of view. And I think he deserves a great deal of more respect than he's often shown. I think he's done a very good job. I think his record compares favourably to Rafa Benitez. He's not as sexy, obviously. And basically, equally, though, I don't blame the Newcastle fans for kind of seizing onto that hope for a brighter future, as they're clearly doing now. But I think, given the opportunity, given the calls and the support, and that he potentially gets from better, different owners, then I think Steve Bruce can do a job. I also think it's just worth touching upon. We've had a lot of scepticism about foreign ownership before, haven't we? And I understand this is completely different from a moral point of view. I remember writing about it, about the Abramovich takeover and being questioned about Chelsea. Look at what he did for the Premier League and for Chelsea. Look at what Man City, since their takeover has done for that particular area of Manchester. And I cannot deny, I love Man City and what they stand for because of the football that they play. Yes, there's always going to be questions about the investment and what's going on at the moment. But you cannot tell me that basically foreign ownership on some level has been fantastic for the Premier League I do think from a moral standpoint, Newcastle is a case that must be continue to be questioned and sort of looked at very, very intently, I think.
You say question, John. Sound isn't perfect on these devices. Did you actually say that Steve Bruce isn't as sexy as Rafa Benitez? Because that is a whole different debate. But we have to take a break right now, and after which we'll be talking Phil Neville and the Lionesses. Now, this week, the FA issued a statement saying that Phil Neville will be leaving his post at the end of his contract. Now, the complication, of course, is that the Euros have been moved back, and also the Olympics actually start. Obviously, the Lionesses have already qualified for those. The Olympics start a few weeks after his actual contract ends as well, next summer. So a huge mess. Henry, what do you read into this, and also how it's been handled?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, you look at where the story was very well sourced. It came from Matt Lawton, The Times, and also Dom King at the Mail as well. And I mean, it was probably inevitable. And I think the interesting thing now is how much of a role Phil Neville has in appointing his successor. I think it's something that Martin mentioned in his column the other day, that because of the FA pathway, I think it should be a woman manages the England women's team. And then I think if you take that, I think you look at Casey Stoney at Manchester United. Why? So I agree with you that it hasn't been handled well in terms of the way the FA have allowed the news to come out. But I think they have to make the right step forward now. And, you look at Emma Hayes at Chelsea. I know she's on record as saying she doesn't want to leave Chelsea. She's got big ambitions with the club. But there's some talented female coaches out there. You can go to America and look at sort of Jill Ellis, who I think was born near Portsmouth as well. So there are some talented candidates. And Casey Stoney at Manchester United, another year when football starts coming back, then that she's incredibly talented. I'm sure some of the former players will look at her playing pedigree as well, and the number of caps that she won with the Lionesses, and I think that will, that will be well received in the dressing room. But okay, the FA may not have handled it particularly well, but I think they've actually got to move on for that and make sure they get the right person long term.
Martin, as Henry said there, that we understand that the brief is that the next appointment should be a woman. That certainly seems to be the consensus of opinion. What do you make of that declaration? Should it not be the best person for the job?
No, it shouldn't. It should be the best. It should be the best English-born coach for the job. I've always believed the national manager of the national team should be from the country. Should be from that country. I never agreed with foreign managers of the England team, the England men's team. I think it's a form of cheating, and it's not illegal cheating, but I think it's meant to be, international football is meant to be the best of yours against the best of theirs, and if it's not, well then what's the point of it really? So I do believe that the national coach should be from that country. And as it's the England women's team, I think it should be a female coach, because you've got to show this is the premier job for an English female coach, and we're going to give it to an English female coach. We're not going to just pluck someone from the men's game and say have this because everyone's heard of you. I'm not saying that's why Phil Neville got it necessarily, but you can't just cherry pick from outside of that realm, and you've got to give people encouragement. You've got to say, look, if you are a good coach, we've got a way forward for you. We have got a way forward for you to get the top job in the country. And I thought we should have started after Mark Sampson, but if we can't start after Mark Sampson, let's start after Phil Neville.
John, it's my understanding that there are more male coaches in the WSL than female. So again, I'll put the same point to you. Do you think it is appropriate to be gender specific about the next coach?
I think it's an odd one. I must say it's clearly directed forward. As I read, this week by Sue Campbell, wasn't it? Sort of head of the women's national game, really. And I do think it's a strange one, because I think it takes me back to the point that I think should be should be made in that basically Phil Neville, I think, his appointment to the role in the first place was met with criticism, scepticism, and I just think he defied all that. He did a very, very good job. He gave it, a profile, and we have to accept that, whether we like it or not. It was a high-profile appointment, and I think he did really, really well. I mean, if you take it up to the World Cup in isolation, I think Phil Neville deserves an awful lot of credit for the job that he did. I mean, after that, clearly results, have fallen away. You wonder whether that is partly because I think of a degree of what happens next. It never sits well with me when you have this doubt whether the manager is going to go or not, because I think any uncertainty, I think, is seized on by players, and results tend to fade away, as I think have done in this case. I actually think that basically you appoint, I think, the best person for the job. That's not necessarily a male or female appointment. I'm surprised that is being such a clear directive, such a clear thing. And I actually feel as quite strongly about this that you always go for the best person for the job. I think the ideal for the men's game is obviously it goes through the pathway, it goes through St George's Park. Of course, you want to follow that. And of course, I think the FA want to follow that for Gareth Southgate's successors, so why in the women's thing? But I'm just not quite sure that basically the coaches were out there. But I just feel as if you should appoint the best person possible for the role and to take on this job and to push it on to the next level, because I do think that Phil Neville has taken it on and really improved, I think, the women's national team.
I totally take Jeff's point about the number of men's coaches in the women's game. The England national team is different. They're clubs, and this is my point about national football. And that if it's not the best of yours, well, then there's no point in it. It's no different to clubs. Clubs can have who they want in charge. They're private companies. They appoint who they want. This is the national team. It means a little bit more. There is a point at which you've got to say, right, if we don't set the example, who does set the example? If we don't say to women coaches, we will encourage you. We will encourage you. We will promote you to the pinnacle of your game. If the FA aren't prepared to do that, well, who is prepared to do that? You can't rely on the clubs to do that, because the clubs are private enterprises. They're there to make money, ostensibly, in the men's game. So, I think it's a totally different thing being the national coach. Totally different thing.
Henry, where does it leave the Lionesses right now? Because, as we said, they qualified for the Olympics. The players, we understand, are upset because they only found out via the media that Phil Neville's contract would not be renewed. And they've got no qualifiers to play for the next 11 months.